Good morning, dear friends. Hope you were able to read John chapter 1 meaningfully after the presentation yesterday. And today we move into the second chapter of the Gospel of John. Remember, the Gospel of John is divided into two large sections. The first section from chapter 1 after the prologue up to chapter 12, we have the book of signs, wherein we have 7 signs performed by Jesus. And the second part from chapter 13 till chapter 20, we have the book of glory, and chapter 21 is considered as an appendix. And in this book of signs, which is the first part of the Gospel of John, these 7 signs are explaining to us that Jesus is really the Messiah, the Son of God. And in this second chapter, we have the first sign that Jesus performs, that is at the wedding at Cana. And this second chapter that we are studying today, that we are looking today, has 2 sections. One, the sign that Jesus performs at the wedding at Cana, and secondly, we find Jesus cleansing the temple. Now, if we come to the first section, the first sign that Jesus performs, the wedding at Cana, to answer the question, why did Jesus perform that sign? The answer is very obvious. To increase the faith of the disciples so that his disciples would believe in him. And that is seen very clearly in verse 11, wherein we read, Jesus did this, the first of his signs in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. And of course, in this first miracle, we have the presence of Mary, the mother of Jesus. Mother of Jesus is found in this first sign at the beginning of the Gospel of John, and also at the end when Jesus dies on the cross. There too, the presence of our Blessed Mother is there. Dear friends, in this first sign that Jesus performs, he changes water into wine, the water that was meant for the Jewish rite of purification. And thus changing that water, which was meant for purification, which was part of the law, now Jesus is replacing the law with himself. From now on, the Gospel says, the purification, sanctification, justification comes not from the law, but from Jesus the Messiah. And of course, let us remember, it is happening in the context of a wedding, and Jesus changes the water into wine, and there is abundance of wine, abundance of good wine. And in the Old Testament, when it is spoken of wine, abundance of good wine, it is always in the context of the Messianic times. And so, if you read Amos chapter 9, Hosea chapter 2, Joel chapter 2, Isaiah 25, 36, 55, Jeremiah 31, 33, it will all speak about Messianic times, and the sign of that Messianic time is good wine, abundance of wine. And so in this first sign, Jesus changes the water into wine and thus shows himself once again as a Messiah, as a bridegroom, as a Messiah. And coming to the second episode in the second chapter, we have the scene shifts from Cana to Jerusalem, and Jesus cleanses the temple in Jerusalem. The Synoptic Gospel, this particular episode happens at the end, and that is the prime cause for the crucifixion of Jesus. And in the Synoptic Gospel, Jesus goes only once to Jerusalem, whereas in John's Gospel, he frequently goes to Jerusalem, and so this particular episode of Jesus cleansing the temple is placed at the beginning of the Gospel. And Jesus here in this particular episode also replaces the temple which was the presence of God. Now, according to the Jewish tradition, God is present in the temple. And now Jesus says very clearly, destroy this temple and in 3 days I will raise it up, speaking about his own body. And so he replaces the temple with himself. From now on, the presence of God is no more in the temple. The presence of God is in Jesus, the God with us, Emmanuel. And this second chapter would end with a transition which we have from 23 to 25, wherein the evangelist says Many believed in him, but their faith was not very strong, and Jesus knew about that. Dear friends, let us read this second chapter of the Gospel of John, wherein we have these two key passages of the wedding at Cana and Jesus cleansing the temple, and let us draw inspiration for our own lives.